4 and after 4 o'clock, John Cobell Show on demand on the iHeart app. That's the podcast. Well, we've got even more here on Boeing and specifically the Alaska Airlines flight that started this whole series of stories of Boeing, one safety issue after another. The original story is the door plug blowing out in January. And if you remember, there were a number of passengers who nearly got sucked out of the plane and others who were traumatized. And a group is filing a lawsuit against Boeing, Alaska Airlines, Spirit AeroSystems that supplies the fuselage to Boeing, and others. We're going to talk with the attorney for these plaintiffs, Timothy Loranger. Welcome to the John Cobell Show. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
These people were they all gathered around where the plug blew out? Like they experienced the most of the the fright and the trauma?
Yes, absolutely. The clients that I represent were very close to where the door plug exploded out of the fuselage. Kun Tran was one row behind. He was, if not for his seatbelt, was nearly sucked out of the airplane, suffered physical injuries and serious, psychological injuries from being in this plane.
Yeah. In fact, Tran said he saw another person's shirt get sucked off his body and fly across the plane. Do you know why the two seats immediately adjacent to the door plug were empty? I thought that was an incredible coincidence. There were only 6 empty seats, and it was 171 passengers. And there are people have been wondering, did two people who had those seats hear whistling or noises coming out of the door plug and they moved themselves before it happened?
Well, I've heard those stories that there was whistling coming from that part of the airplane. And what I'm not clear about is whether or not that was on this particular flight. And as you may have read in the news, there were other reports that the cockpit was getting some signals that there was a problem with the pressurization system.
Yeah.
It's possible, and we don't know yet, but those things may have all been related to the ultimate failure that we saw in the door plug. So maybe they were keeping those seats free of persons because they didn't know what was going on. I mean, those things will come out in the litigation.
Yeah, that's a possibility I hadn't thought of. But they were worried about flying that plane because they restricted it so it could only fly over land. It wasn't allowed to go to Hawaii because they wanted to keep airports within sight for an emergency landing, which I thought was really weird because if you're that worried about the plane, then take it out of service.
And that's an excellent point. If you have an issue with the aircraft, you haven't been able to resolve it, I think it's time to put that aircraft, keep it on the ground, do some good maintenance on it, and make sure that it's safe to fly.
A story, I forgot it was in the New York Times or in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, that the pressurization light, as you said, went on twice in the previous days, but the protocol says 3 times. And the engineers were split. One set said we should pull it out of service, and the other said, no, let's go one more day, and we'll work on it tomorrow. Is that what you're hearing, or is that what you're getting from your investigations?
That is what we're hearing, and it just raises so many questions about when how you make these decisions. If it is, I think you always err on the side of caution. Safety is paramount. I'm sure we'll hear that from the defendants or, from Boeing and Alaska Airlines. That's their main concern. Why not take the safest route, pull the aircraft out of service?
I can't imagine this thing would go to trial. I mean, it happened. Everybody in the world knows it happened. The question is, how quickly are they going to come to a settlement? Is that the way you see it?
Well, we will prepare the case for trial. We always make sure that we're ready to go to trial. But as we know, most cases settle. In this situation, the liability seems to be very clear that the work that was done on the aircraft was certainly subpar. Bolts apparently were not installed on the door plug when it was being reinstalled. So there is negligence in that regard. And so, yes, we'll see what happens. Settlement makes sense in a case like this.
Well, there's
there's
so much evidence that is stacking up against them. The bolts weren't there. They don't have video of the factory work being done. That's mysteriously got erased. There's no documentation maybe ever made. I mean, each one of these by itself is outrageous. You add them all together, it's impossible to believe.
It really is. It really is, and especially in light of all of the other issues that Boeing has come out about Boeing's lack of appropriate procedures for maintenance and inspection, design issues with the Boeing MAX 8. And a cavalcade of other issues that have arisen since this incident. So I agree with your sentiment, absolutely.
Are you getting calls from any insiders, whistleblowers, explaining what's going on? Because a couple of whistleblowers have spoken and talked about the ridiculous pressure everybody was under to keep the production lines moving no matter what. And if you went against their orders, you were gone. There was a lot of coercion. Are you getting any information along those lines?
I haven't spoken to a whistleblower about this particular incident, but I have spoken with someone with regard to other issues at Boeing. Certainly, I can't talk about those things, but there are people within the company. Clearly, we've seen it in the news. There are people who are very concerned about what has been going on there at the factory.
I mean, Boeing had those two deadly crashes back in 2018, 2019, I believe. One was in Indonesia, right? One was in Ethiopia. And it was that new MAX line of planes, and they had to pay $2.5 billion in those cases because hundreds and hundreds of people died. And you would think that would shock the company into being ultra conservative in the production of their airplanes. And it seems like things have gotten sloppier.
Yeah, you definitely wonder what is going on over there. I mean, there is not a common thread between all of these incidents as between the MAX 8. I mean, that was a design issue. They were trying to basically develop a new aircraft without having to start from scratch. And so there were many engineering issues that came up, along with the very uncomfortable idea that Boeing gets to monitor itself. The FAA handed its responsibilities to them and said, go ahead and sign off on these new designs.
Well, Timothy, thank you for coming on with us. Timothy Loranger, and he's representing a number of clients who were on that Alaska Airlines flight when the door plug blew out, and they're suing. They're suing Boeing, Alaska, Spirit Aerosystems, and others. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me on.
All right. More coming up.